A lost boy was protected by a bear. 20 years later, he learned the shocking truth. In the heart of Alaska's endless wilderness, where pine trees stretched toward the heavens and snow blanketed the ground like a never-ending sea of white, a boy named Ethan wandered deeper into the forest than he ever should have. He was only 8 years old when it happened. His family had come for a camping trip, a short escape from city life. Laughter echoed around the campfire that night as his parents told him stories of stars and constellations. But when dawn arrived, everything changed. Chasing the distant call of a bird, Ethan strayed too far from the campsite. The forest was vast, and the deeper he went, the more it swallowed him whole. What began as a game quickly turned into panic. The sound of his parents calling his name faded until only the whispers of the trees and the crunch of snow under his small boots remained. Fear gripped him as hours passed. The sun began to set, painting the horizon in blood-orange streaks. Shadows stretched long and dark, wrapping the boy in cold loneliness. His little hands trembled, his breath formed clouds in the frigid air. Ethan cried out again and again, but no one answered. His body shook from hunger and exhaustion, and when he finally collapsed against the trunk of a tree, the silence pressed down like a heavy blanket. He closed his eyes, unsure if he would ever open them again. And that's when he felt it. A presence. Heavy, powerful, and close. The ground vibrated softly with each step. Through blurred vision, Ethan caught sight of a massive figure approaching, a bear. Alone, afraid, and too weak to run, the boy's heartbeat thundered in his chest. Was this the end? Or, the beginning of something no one would believe? The bear loomed over him, its shadow stretching across the snow like a living mountain. Ethan's tiny body froze. He had heard the stories. Bears were wild, unpredictable, dangerous. His father once told him that a single swipe from their paw could tear apart a tree trunk. But instead of striking, the bear lowered its massive head and sniffed the trembling boy. Ethan squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for pain, waiting for the end. It never came. Instead, the animal huffed softly, a deep rumbling sound that almost felt calming. The boy dared to peek through half-closed lids. The bear's eyes, dark and reflective, held no anger, no hunger. Only an odd sort of curiosity, as if it saw not prey before it, but something fragile that needed protection. Slowly, the creature settled onto the ground beside him, its thick fur brushing the boy's shoulder. Ethan flinched at the touch, then shivered again, not from fear this time, but from cold. The night air was biting, and the warmth radiating from the bear felt like a fire in the freezing wilderness. Hours slipped by as the boy leaned against the beast. The snowstorm whispered through the trees, but beside his unlikely guardian, he felt safer than he had since leaving camp. At some point, exhaustion claimed him, and he drifted into uneasy sleep. When he awoke the next morning, weak with hunger, the bear was still there. It stood, lumbered a few steps forward, and then glanced back as if urging Ethan to follow. The boy hesitated, but something inside him, perhaps instinct, perhaps trust, pushed him to rise. His legs wobbled, his throat burned with thirst, yet he walked behind the bear. And soon he understood. The bear was leading him. Not to danger, but to survival. The forest was unforgiving. Tall trees towered like sentinels, their branches heavy with snow, while the bitter wind howled through them like an endless warning. For any child alone, it was certain death. But Ethan was not alone. The bear guided him, step by heavy step. At first, Ethan stumbled, uncertain whether to trust the beast completely. Yet each time he faltered, the bear paused and looked back, almost impatient but never threatening. By midday, they reached a half-frozen stream. The bear plunged its snout into the water, pulling out a fish with one swift motion. It dropped the catch onto the bank near Ethan, who stared in disbelief. His stomach cramped with hunger, and though raw fish was never something he had dreamed of eating, desperation left him no choice. With trembling hands, he tasted it. It was cold, strange, but life-saving. That night, Ethan curled against the bear's thick coat for warmth. The beast's slow breathing lulled him to sleep, while snowflakes drifted silently onto their shelter of branches. For the first time since being lost, he didn't cry himself to sleep. Days passed like this. The boy followed the bear through the wilderness, and in return, the bear offered silent guardianship. Once, when wolves emerged from the shadows, their glowing eyes fixed on Ethan, the bear rose to its full height, letting out a roar that shook the forest. The pack scattered instantly, tails tucked between their legs. Ethan's wide eyes filled with both awe and gratitude. Another time, when Ethan's legs gave out from exhaustion, the bear nudged him gently, refusing to let him sink into the snow. It was as if the beast understood. The boy needed strength he did not have. Slowly, Ethan began to trust. He whispered to the bear at night, speaking of his parents, his home, his fear of never being found. The bear never replied, of course, but somehow, sitting there in the quiet of the wilderness, it felt as though the creature was listening. Man and beast. Child and protector. An unlikely bond born from desperation. And something deeper neither could explain. On the seventh day, distant voices broke the silence of the forest. At first, Ethan thought he was dreaming. He had grown so used to the stillness, the whisper of wind, the crunch of snow, the heartbeat-like rhythm of the bear's breathing, that the sudden echo of human sound felt unreal. Ethan. Ethan. His name. His parents' voices. Shaky, desperate, filled with both fear and hope. Ethan's eyes widened, and tears spilled instantly. He scrambled to his feet, yelling back with all the strength he had left. I'm here. I'm here. Within minutes, men in heavy coats pushed through the trees, his parents leading the way. The moment his mother saw him, she cried out and ran, dropping to her knees to pull him into her arms. Ethan clung to her tightly, sobbing against her chest, unable to believe he was finally safe. But in the shadows stood the bear. Watching. Silent. When the men noticed it, shouts of alarm filled the air. Guns were raised, sticks brandished. To them, it was just a wild predator, a threat too close to their lost child. No. Ethan screamed, breaking free of his father's grip. Don't hurt him. He saved me. He saved me. But his words were lost in the chaos. The men shouted, waved their arms, and drove the beast back into the trees. The bear gave one last look, a deep lingering gaze that seemed almost human in its sadness, before turning and disappearing into the forest that had birthed it. Ethan's cries echoed long after. He tried to tell his parents, tried to explain that the bear had been his protector. But to the adults, it was just the fantasy of a frightened child, a way to cope with the trauma of being lost. And so, the bond was broken. The boy was carried home. The bear vanished into memory. But Ethan never forgot. Time moved on, but the memory never faded. Ethan grew into a man, tall and broad-shouldered, yet somewhere inside him, the 8-year-old boy who once leaned against a bear for warmth still lived. He went to school, earned a career, built a life in the city. But the wilderness, it called to him in ways he could never explain. At night, he dreamed of those dark eyes watching over him, of fur against his cheek, of a roar that had chased away wolves. And each morning, he awoke wondering if it had truly happened, or if his parents were right, and it was only his imagination. On the 20th anniversary of his disappearance, Ethan finally returned to Alaska. The same forest still stood, endless and wild, the air sharp with pine and memory. He wandered through familiar paths, guided less by landmarks and more by instinct, until he reached the clearing where he remembered being found. Standing there, he felt a strange pull. His heart pounded as if urging him forward. He wasn't sure what he expected, certainly not to see the bear again after so many years. But still he searched. That evening, he stopped at a small cabin on the edge of the forest. It belonged to an old ranger named Samuel, a man who had spent decades watching over the land and its creatures. When Ethan told him his story, Samuel's weathered face grew serious. "You were that boy," the ranger whispered. His eyes narrowed, as though recalling a long-forgotten legend. "I remember hearing about you. Lost in the woods, found after a week. People said it was a miracle you survived." Ethan leaned forward, desperate. "It wasn't a miracle. It was a bear. He protected me." The old ranger didn't laugh. He didn't scoff. Instead, he nodded slowly, as if the pieces of a puzzle were finally sliding into place. "Then, son," he said quietly, "you deserve to know the truth." The fire crackled in Samuel's cabin as the old ranger leaned back in his chair, eyes distant with memory. "You see, Ethan," he began, "that wasn't just any wild bear. She wasn't like the others." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Samuel sighed. "Years before you were lost, there was a mother bear we called Matka. She had cubs of her own, but one harsh winter, hunters killed them. From that day on, she was different. Fierce, yes, but she had a way with children. Locals told stories of her watching over kids who wandered too far from villages. Most thought it was just folklore. Ethan's chest tightened. He remembered the warmth, the patience, the way she nudged him forward when he stumbled. She lost her own family, Samuel continued softly, and maybe she saw you as hers. The forest has its mysteries, son. Not everything can be explained by science. Ethan's eyes burned with tears. For 20 years, he had wondered if it was just a child's imagination. Now he knew it was real, not a dream, not a fantasy. A grieving bear had chosen to protect him, to give him the chance her own cubs never had. That night, Ethan walked back into the clearing. He stood beneath the moonlight, the same silver glow that had lit his path as a boy. The forest was silent, but he whispered anyway. "Thank you." His voice cracked, carried into the trees. And though no bear appeared, no shadow moved in the distance, Ethan felt it, a presence warm and watchful, lingering in the heart of the wilderness. Sometimes, he realized, family doesn't always come from blood. Sometimes it comes from the most unexpected places, even from the wild itself. And that was the story of Ethan, the lost boy who was protected by a wild bear, and the truth he discovered 20 years later. A reminder that sometimes, the greatest guardians come from the most unexpected places. And that was the story of Ethan, the lost boy who was protected by a wild bear, and the truth he discovered 20 years later. A reminder that sometimes, the greatest guardians come from the most unexpected places. And perhaps the lesson is this: kindness can cross every boundary, even the one between man and beast.